So by now, we all know that America is in the grip of a vicious political tribalism. You flip from Fox News to MSNBC, and it's like you're hearing about two totally different countries. Partisanship has become toxic, and it's increasingly difficult for people on different sides of the political aisle to talk civilly about issues like race, gender, climate change, and election outcomes. Even the pandemic, which a lot of people thought maybe like 9/11 would bring the country together. No, just the opposite happened. COVID was instantly politicized. For the first time in many generations, there is serious talk among serious people that maybe it's just time for America to split up into red America and blue America, which for me, the daughter of two immigrants who came to this country in the 1960s because they saw it as a beacon for the rest of the world, would be tragic. So what I want to do for the next 30 minutes or so is to try first to do my best to explain why America is so bitterly divided today. What are the root causes of this tribalism? And then I want to talk about what future leaders of America, people like you guys, can do going forward to try to overcome this tribalism. And I believe that the answer lies in remembering what it is that makes America so special and exceptional as a nation, different from any other country on the planet, and re-embracing the precious civic values enshrined in our founding document, the US Constitution. And then we'll open things up for questions. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. So let me just start by saying that human beings, like our fellow primates, are tribal animals. It's biological. We're hardwired that way. We can't help it. We need to belong to groups. And once we connect with a group, we tend to want to cling to it and defend it and see our group as better in every way. In a fascinating recent study, children between the ages of 4 and 8, that's really young, were randomly assigned to either the red group or the blue group. Not what you'd think would be a really intense divide. So they were assigned to either the red group or the blue group, and then given corresponding t-shirts, either a red t-shirt or a blue t-shirt. These kids, these subjects, were then shown computer-edited images of a whole bunch of other children, half of whom were wearing red t-shirts and the other half wearing blue t-shirts. These young subjects between the ages of 4 and 8 were then asked for their reactions to these children in the computer images. The results were stunning. Even though these kids knew absolutely nothing about the kids in the computer images, they consistently said they liked the kids wearing their color better, wanted to allocate more resources to them, and perhaps most disturbingly, exhibited systematic unconscious bias, memory distortion. That is, they were told stories about all these kids, and these children tended to remember all of the positive things about the children wearing their color and all the negative things about the children on the other team. So human beings aren't just a little tribal. We are very tribal. And once we belong to a group, our identities can become oddly bound up with it. The effect is like a drug. We will seek to benefit our group mates even when we personally gain nothing, and we will take pleasure when out-group members fail or suffer a misfortune. Studies show that our brains actually light up with pleasure when we stick it to the other side. We will sacrifice and sometimes even kill and die for our groups. Now, having said that, tribalism is not necessarily a bad thing. Sports is a great example. I mean, we're here in an arena, and it can be fun. Family can be very tribal. I will be the first to admit that I am a huge family person and a very tribal person. The problem, though, is when tribalism takes over a political system. That's when things get dangerous, because then you start seeing everything through your group's lens. And facts and statistics and arguments and policies, they don't matter. You just stick to your tribe no matter what and try to take down the other side. And that's what we're seeing in America today. That's why we can't get anything done. We can't even talk to each other. We're at the point where many Americans see people who voted for the other side, not just people that they want to argue with or debate, but as immoral, evil, and un-American, which is a really dangerous state of affairs if you feel that way about half the country. It's really a recipe for civil war. At the same time, we're seeing a fracturing and splintering within groups, within the left, within the right, with ever-dividing groups pitting themselves against each other. So the next question is why? Why is this happening now? What is different about this moment? And I want to highlight 3 factors that I think make this moment different from anything we've seen before in the history of the United States. The first factor is the massive demographic transformation that this country is undergoing. For 200 years, America was dominated economically, politically, and culturally by a white majority. Now, when one group is so overwhelmingly dominant, it can do lots of terrible things. It can oppress, it can enslave, persecute with impunity. But interestingly, an overwhelmingly dominant group like that can also afford to be more generous, to be more inclusive. Like, for example, the WASP elites of the 1960s, who basically voluntarily opened up the universities of this country to more Jews, blacks, Asians, and other minorities, in part because it just seemed like the right thing to do. Today, that's totally different. Why? Because today, for the first time in US history, whites are on the verge of losing their majority status at the national level. The estimates differ a little bit. The Pew Foundation says it's going to happen in 2044. US Census says 2050. There are debates about exactly what that's going to look like, but it's going to happen. It's already happening. Non-Hispanic whites are already no longer a majority in a number of states and major cities in this country. Why is that important? It's important because that as a result, in America today, every group feels threatened. It's not just the minorities anymore who feel threatened. Whites feel threatened. Over half of white Americans feel that they are now subject to more discrimination than minorities. And this is not just a Republican thing. According to the Pew Foundation, because of affirmative action, diversity policies, competition for college spots, about 30% of Democrats believe that there is some or a lot of anti-white discrimination. Today, it's not just religious minorities like Jews or Muslims who feel threatened. Christians feel threatened. You see this in the political rhetoric of war on the Bible, war on Christmas. When Donald Trump became president, many women felt threatened. With the Me Too movement, men feel threatened. Straights and gays, Latinos and Asians, everyone feels threatened. And studies show that it's exactly when groups feel threatened, that's when they retreat into tribalism. That's when they close ranks, become more insular, more us versus them, and more defensive. And that is why we are seeing a new kind of really explicit identity politics today on both sides of the political spectrum. So on the right, we are now seeing openly xenophobic white nationalist movements proudly holding conferences in DC and being covered by the mainstream media in a way that would have been shocking just maybe 8 years ago. A common theme is that the white race is in danger of extinction, about to be drowned by a rising tide of non-white people who are demonized as criminals or spies or people who take jobs away from real Americans. On the left, it's just as bad. Today, there are openly anti-white movements. There's a growing number of best-selling books and training programs right on the campus where I work in which whites are demonized and asked to feel guilty and bad about themselves just for being white. So the result is more and more resentment and distrust all around. And I teach on probably the most progressive campus in the country, and I see this in such an extreme form. There is so much more self-segregation, all the different ethnic groups, races, religions, everybody's separate, and a hardening of those lines, and more policing. For 20 years of teaching, my favorite thing is I would see my conservative and liberal students debating, arguing. I would deliberately make provocative discussions, and they would become friends. That is absolutely not possible anymore. Today, if you are a progressive student, and forget about having a friend who's a Republican, let's say you just like something they tweeted or something to stand up for them on some small point, you are instantly shamed and ostracized, no longer part of the tribe. Note that this is a huge change in the progressive movement. I know you just had Martin Luther King III here speaking beautifully, but if you think of the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s, which I know most of you were not born, or even the international human rights movement of the 1990s and 2000s, those were progressive, but their vision and goals were framed in universalist terms, inclusive terms, and that is not true of progressives today. So that is the first factor that I think is causing all of the kind of bitter polarization that we see because of the massive demographic changes that we've been experiencing really over the last 50 years. No group in America today feels comfortably dominant. Every group, whites, blacks, Muslims, Christians, they all feel attacked, persecuted, and pitted against other groups for jobs, spoils, university spots, and most importantly, the right to define the nation's identity.